So I'm Tessa Meijer, and I'm an artist who makes decorated animal skulls and decorations on wood.
Okay.
Based around nature and animals, creatures.
Okay. Let's start by talking about the art, the kind of art that you made at school, because that seems relevant.
Yes, when I was at school, I made pottery animals in pottery class. I made dragons and various creatures like that. My pottery master was delighted because they filled up the kiln because they were large. I also did a lot of work with papier-mâché. I liked 3D stuff.
Right, so it's sculpting, modelling, that kind of thing you like.
Definitely. Yeah.
Right, so that's kind of kept going. Or you come back to it.
I've come back to it. Yeah, I didn't make art for a lot of my life. I've come back to it because now I have the time.
Right. What got you interested in skulls?
Oh, I've been interested in skulls since I was a child. I used to collect animal skulls when we found them, wild animals, domestic animals sometimes. So I always had a fascination. I've always found them very beautiful and fascinating. I love nature, so I'm really interested in how things travel through a skull. You can see where nerves and muscles move through or are attached.
Yeah.
Where the eye sockets, I mean, it's just fascinating. You can see there are places where the optic nerve goes through. So, as an animal lover, it's always been something that's fascinated me, is skulls.
Okay, but you didn't always decorate them, so what prompted you to start doing that?
That was a particular incident. That was a holiday that I took with my sister and my nephew in the Lake District in the UK. And my nephew knew that I loved animal skulls, and he'd found a sheep. And he didn't want to pick it up, but he took me to see it, so I collected it. And I cleaned it when I got home, but it had been a really special holiday. And I'd taken a lot of photos, and I thought it would be really nice to commemorate the holiday over the skull that had been found on the holiday. And once I'd done that, I started to get an idea for that would be something that I'd like to continue to do.
How do you come by the skulls? Is it people bring them to you, or?
Yes, in the past it's been either I've collected them or people who know that I like skulls have brought them to me. More recently, because we now live in the south of France, in an area where there are vultures, there are a lot of skulls that I find that have been cleaned by vultures. There are particular spots here where you can collect skulls that have been cleaned. So, yeah, and these days I'm finding it harder to get skulls, so occasionally I will buy skulls on eBay.
Right, okay. Do you prefer the ones that you come by that way, or?
Yeah, I'd much prefer to find them myself, and I like to know the history of the skull too. So, for instance, an animal that I've seen dead in the summer, I'll go back in the winter and I'll collect it, and I'll know probably, I can guess why it died. It might have been age or thirst, or shot by a hunter in the winter and died of injuries later on. So I'm interested in knowing the history of the animal.
Right, and does that get reflected in the work, in your practice?
It has been, yes. When I first started, and I used to allude to the history of the animal, where it had been found, perhaps what kind of life it might have had. I'm guessing what kind of life it might have had before it died. And then quite often I would include a vulture, a painting or a photo of a vulture on the skull itself to hint at.
You've talked to me before about kind of wanting to give the animals some kind of continuity, so a life after death.
Yes, in a way. It's
to honour it.
Yes, it's a way of honouring the animal, I guess, because I'm an animal lover. I don't find skulls morbid like some people do. I find them very beautiful, but I'm also fascinated by the life that the animal had, So it is a way of giving them, second life and an honour, make them beautiful.
Yeah, so you find them beautiful.
Yes, and then they also have another life because these days I exhibit and people buy them, and they have a perpetuity in a way.
So you started out putting photos on the skulls.
Yeah, they started off being quite 2D. So photos, decoupage, I did some hand painting, yeah.
Mandalas?
Yes, I painted mandalas on quite a lot of skulls. I went through a phase of painting mandalas on stones and then onto my skulls. Yeah.
Okay, but now you seem to go more for three-dimensional.
Yeah, I had an idea a few years ago to use modelling clay to make animals to go on top of the skulls, and I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work. But I bought some modelling clay and I experimented, and I found the effect really pleasing and very much more what I wanted. I could express myself much better with the modelling clay. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I'm doing a lot of work of, it's not exactly 3D, but it's modelling clay on top of the skull and then painted. Yeah.
And how do you choose what kind of creatures? Because it's mainly creatures and plants, isn't it?
It is,
model.
and creatures that I like personally. So I like insects and reptiles and sea creatures. So I do a lot of those.
Okay. Do they have to have some relevance to the animal, or...?
Not these days. This one, the one that's sitting on my desk at the moment, that's jellyfish. And that's got nothing to do with a wild boar, because this is a wild boar. I've done a horse. I started off thinking, a skull sitting in a wood or in a field years after the animal itself has died. You get creatures crawling over those skulls, and that was my initial thought, was to represent animals that might be crawling on skulls. But it's become much more, well, not mythical, but much more fantastical these days, because I get more and more ideas as I work.
What do the artworks mean to you, personally?
Gosh, that's a really hard one. It's a form of self-expression, as art always is. It's not particularly meaningful, but it's expressing the way I feel about nature and the way I feel about my environment. I guess that's the main driver for me, is an expression of my feelings and my love and my passion for animals like this, for squid and butterflies and snakes and lizards. So I'm able to reproduce my feelings about these animals on my skulls. That's partly it.
Right. Okay.
And a desire to create something beautiful, out of something that maybe had an awful death, who knows, but to create something beautiful.
Sort of giving it a second life.
Yes, as we said, a second life, a different life. So, it was once a beautiful animal, a wild animal, or a domesticated animal. And then they died and rotted, as animals do, and became, to a lot of people's eyes, not beautiful. So, yeah, I'm hoping that I can make something beautiful again.
How important is realism in your work?
Again, because things are evolving, I'd say at the beginning it was very important to me. I studied images of animals online, and I have somewhere I've got a wildlife book that I use to refer to make sure that things are accurate. The colours I did not make accurate, mostly because I was aiming for beauty. But that's become less important now, realism. So, yeah, quite a lot of my animals, they're not to size or to scale. When they're grouped like this on a skull, they're not to size or scale as they would be in real life. I just, these days, trying to create an impression. Okay.
But you seem to work quite hard on making the form of the animal quite true to life.
Yes, I do. This is true. Yeah, I mean, on this particular skull here, I've tried very hard to make the jellyfish look like they're swimming and look like jellyfish, I guess.
Right, but there's something kind of there's something very vibrant about the colours and your choice of colours.
Yeah. I like bright colours.
And in the overall kind of composition of your artworks, I mean, you tend to fill the canvas, as it were, don't you?
I like to. Yes, I'm put off by bare patches.
Right.
I have to restrain myself sometimes to make something that's not quite so busy. But
How exactly do you start? So you acquire the skull of an animal, and then what do you do?
then I've either got an idea in my head from maybe a previous skull that's given me a clue. For instance, I did another wild boar before this one, and on that I made some seahorses and some fish, and I really liked them. And I thought, perhaps I'll do more sea creatures. And then I had the idea of jellyfish to make it kind of move. Sometimes it works like that. Sometimes I go online and I have a look at images and see if something sparks off an idea or a theme. I'll look through my books, my nature books, and see if there's something there that gives me a spark.
Right, okay. And if you know something about the animal itself, the history of that particular skull.
That's also true. I have come across the skulls of sheepdogs, and because I own a sheepdog myself, that always gives me. I have ideas about the dog, the relationship with the sheep, and quite often with the dogs, I make an effort to make a connection with the animal's previous life. Sometimes it's just fantastical. Sometimes it's just comes out of nowhere.
Right. Okay. And you don't work just with skulls, because you've done some work with wood.
Yeah, I've started to do that because it occurred to me that if I find nice twisty bits of wood, they lend themselves really well to creating animals and plants and vines around all the. So for instance, if it's a root, that can work really well. So that's been a new departure, and I've really enjoyed that.
Would you say that any other artists have influenced your work, influenced your thinking?
I mean, I very much like the work of Picasso, obviously, and the Impressionists, and maybe there's a bit of that in there. I saw, in Paris recently, we saw an exhibition that included work by an artist called Serena Caroni, and she was a big influence recently for me.
Okay, so you haven't always made sculptures and three-dimensional art?
No, I also make little films, set to music. I went through a phase when we lived in London, or in Brighton in the UK, and in London. I went through a phase of filming a lot of urban life and making little videos from that, and also interesting bits of nature. There was the video that I made that was based around stills and video that I took of an abandoned spa here in France, and that made for some glorious images. But again, I see it. There's a similarity because it's a form of collage, really, making video. The way I make it, I layer my videos very much, and I think I do something similar now with the skulls. It's a lot of layering to create a very particular effect. I do still make videos. You know, the drive to make something is actually go on more onto this sort of thing than the videos. But there's definitely a link between the two. Yeah.